What is emulation? At its core, emulation is software that pretends to be another system. The easiest way to understand it is to think of it like a translator. A game designed for a console speaks a completely different language than your computer does. When that game tries to send instructions, your PC wouldn't normally understand them. An emulator steps in between, translating those instructions in real time so your computer knows what to do. When the game says something like render this character or play this sound, the emulator converts those commands into something your hardware can actually process, making it seem like the original console is running inside your machine. Emulation versus simulation versus virtualization. Emulation is often confused with simulation and virtualization, but they are very different concepts. Emulation is about recreating hardware as accurately as possible, essentially tricking software into thinking it's running on the original system. Simulation, on the other hand, focuses on recreating behavior rather than exact hardware, so it may look similar but isn't truly identical underneath. Virtualization is different again, because it runs software in an environment that is already compatible, just separated or sandboxed. In gaming, emulation is necessary because consoles and PCs are fundamentally different systems, so you need that layer of translation to bridge the gap. What are ROMs? For an emulator to actually run a game, it needs access to the game's data, and that's where ROMs come in. A ROM is simply a digital copy of a game that originally existed on a cartridge or disc. Back when these games were first released, all their data was stored physically, but with emulation, that data is extracted into a file that your computer can read. The emulator then loads that file and begins translating its instructions just like the original console would. Without ROMs, an emulator doesn't have anything to run, making it essentially an empty shell. What is a BIOS? Some systems require more than just the game itself. They also rely on something called a BIOS. The BIOS is like the console's built-in startup system, responsible for initializing hardware and preparing everything before the game begins. It controls basic functions like booting up the system and reading game data. In emulation, certain consoles won't function properly without their BIOS because it's a key part of how the original hardware operated. Without it, the emulator may fail to start games or behave incorrectly. Why different emulators exist. One of the biggest misconceptions about emulation is the idea that a single emulator can run every game ever made. In reality, each console has its own unique design, including different processors, graphics systems, and internal architecture. For example, a system like the Super Nintendo Entertainment System operates completely differently from newer consoles. Because of these differences, emulators are usually built to replicate one specific system at a time. That's why you'll often need different programs depending on what you want to play. Accuracy versus performance. Not all emulators are built with the same priorities in mind. Some developers focus on accuracy, trying to recreate the original hardware as perfectly as possible, down to the smallest details. This can result in a very authentic experience, but it often requires more powerful hardware and can be harder to run smoothly. Other emulators prioritize performance, making games run faster and more efficiently, even if it means cutting some corners in accuracy. This creates a trade-off between experiencing the game exactly as it was originally designed and enjoying smoother gameplay on modern systems. Input lag and save states. Because emulation involves multiple layers of translation, it can sometimes introduce delays, especially when it comes to input. When you press a button, that command has to pass through your controller, into the emulator, get translated, and then reach the game itself before anything happens on screen. This process can create what's known as input lag. However, emulation also introduces features that were never possible on original hardware. One of the most popular is save states, which allow you to freeze a game at any exact moment and resume from that point instantly. It's a powerful tool that changes how games can be experienced, especially for difficult or older titles.